Hi, are you a landlord who's wondering if you should self-manage your properties or if you should hire a professional property manager? We're here to talk about just that thing. My name is Sasha Lightfoot, and I am a co-founder of Landlord Help Hub, and we specialize in educating and empowering landlords to be the best landlords that they can in their markets and with their properties. And my co-founder is here with us as well as a special guest. So Elizabeth, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Colgrove. I am a military spouse. I'm also been in property management from the self-managing side since 2011 when we bought our first house, or 2010 we bought our first house, 2011 we bought our first rental. And I'm here to teach you about how it's to do it correctly. It's been the best thing that's ever happened to us, but you want to make sure you do it correct.
Awesome. And I am Angie McDaniel. I am the owner of rentrisk.com and Command Properties. I'm a military spouse of 29 years and have been a landlord personally for over 25 years. We do both short-term and long-term rentals. And back in 2013, while my husband was still active duty Navy, I started Command Properties, which is a full service property management company in Northern Virginia, and we currently manage about $200 million in individually owned residential assets. Most of our clientele are government personnel who are stationed overseas, and we're managing their personal homes. So it requires a high level of service. And during that time, we have screened thousands of tenants over the last decade plus, and have become known as experts in that field. And with our clients, we have never had an eviction. We do not have tenants who pay late, and we've never had property damage, and we're really proud of that record. So what we did is we partnered with Experian, and we launched a rent risk so that we could teach other landlords how to protect themselves and lower their risk with tenants they put in their property. So excited to share my experience and thoughts with you guys today.
Well, that is definitely something to be proud of, Angie, and we're glad that you could join us today. So as we talk about whether a landlord should self-manage or hire a professional property manager, there are several things that we have to consider. So we'll just get started with going through some of the pros and cons of managing yourself or managing your properties yourself or hiring a professional property manager. But I think that it's important for us to point out that there is no cookie cutter answer. Everyone has properties in different markets. Maybe there's no such thing as like a completely hands-off answer either. So whether you decide to self-manage, you're going to be really involved. And if you have a property management and you're doing it correctly, you're going to be involved as a landlord. So one of the first things we thought we would talk about are standards. And Angie, since you're the property manager subject matter expert, why don't you share with us a little bit about the standards that come into play with property management?
Yeah, I would say I would just piggyback on what you said as we approach both of these topics. Like you said, there's no cookie cutter answer for everyone. One of the number one things that a person has to do is you really need to know yourself. You need to know, are you somebody who wants to have a lot of control over things? Or are you too busy? Is your situation where you have a career that's very demanding, a career and family that's demanding, and you need that assistance to have a property management company? So no matter which way you go, know yourself, but just know what you're getting into with each of these options. So there might be a period of time where you self-manage and then you switch to property management, or vice versa. So as you're approaching and making these decisions, remember the kind of person you are and how you operate and what you need at that time. But a lot of the information, like we were talking before we started recording this, there's a lot of information online about property management companies and how to select one, and that's great. You can take that information; it's a good springboard. But the real nitty gritty comes down to some of these things that we have up on the screen right now, and the number one thing is standards. The standard that you hold with how you operate or how your property management company operates will make or break you financially and make or break your experience with your investment property. And what I mean by standards is What kind of standard do they keep in terms of keeping the property updated, keeping the property in good condition? A lot of times companies operate with a lower standard, meaning they approach it, well, it's just a rental property. You know, we can Band-Aid things here or there. And then over time, the property can become dilapidated, and you're not going to attract a quality tenant with a dilapidated property. You're going to have a lot of deferred maintenance, which is going to be more expensive down the road. So you want a company that's going to keep the standard high and maintain the property. And then the other really, really critical domino on standards is the tenant screening process. You want to find out from that management company, what is their standard? What is their threshold? What are the requirements that they have for a potential tenant? So in other words, a lot of companies, their standard might be a minimum credit score of 600, which is incredibly low and puts you very much at risk. Usually someone with a credit score like that has a history of late payments, and you see this behavior pattern. Their credit history is the number one indicator of whether or not they're going to pay the rent and if they're responsible and they're going to take care of the property. So I'm spending a lot of time on standards because that standard really matters. It is literally the property management company, or yourself, if you do it yourself, you're the gatekeeper of this asset. You do not want to hand over the asset to someone who's not qualified to be there, just like you wouldn't hand over your 401k to just any old person off the street that doesn't have experience with managing a portfolio, a financial portfolio. Your home is in that financial portfolio. So you want a management company who's going to have a higher standard on credit. You want to know if you can have a say in that as well, or they're going to make that decision for you. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going into visibility already.
No, that's all great information. I don't know, Elizabeth, was there anything that you would like to add?
I think the biggest thing that I like to say during this whole thing is if you can find a top tier, amazing property management company that beats every standard and leads the nation in property management, you will never be able to beat them as a self-manager. You don't have the knowledge, you don't have the ability, you just can't do it. I've been doing this for 15 years. It's just not able to. The point that I'd like to make is that you have to find a high tier. The reality is where I advocate self-management is when you can't find what Angie offers. Like if you can't find that ability, going to just anybody might be worse than just doing it yourself. So
100%.
for me, when you look at standards, visibility, full service contract terms and implications, I just want to emphasize that use what we're talking about on what we look for in a property management to see if you can find that. And if you can't find that, evaluate what level they are and what the risk is, and then what is more risky, doing it yourself or hiring what that tier is and at the level.
Yeah. And the other, the next point is the visibility. And what we mean by visibility is, when you sign that management contract, you're signing over a lot of authority to that management company to make decisions on your behalf, financial decisions on your behalf. So if they are choosing the tenant for you and you don't have a say, if they're signing the lease for you, in other words, as the management company, as the landlord and the tenant, so you don't really see that. A lot of times what I see is that a homeowner has no idea that their property was vacated. They don't know that the lease was renewed, or they don't know that it's been on the market for whatever price that the property management company determined was the price. They can do this stuff without even informing you or including you. And you need to have these conversations. Do you even, like one of the things that we do, we have our landlords sign the lease with the tenant. We don't do it on their behalf. We want full disclosure. We want them to sign off on who's going into the property. And we're going to give them, of course, our professional, opinion and direction on that. But we want them to sign the lease. We want, them to be involved when it's time for the lease to be renewed. We don't even know if they want to renew the lease. They might need to move back in the property. We've got to talk to them about that. And then if they do renew, do we want a price increase? If it's got to go on the market, what's the current market value? We're having these conversations with our landlords because they're the ones who own the home. We're just here to help steward the home and help them because they're usually not in the area or they're too busy. So we want to have that involvement where they know what's going on. So these are the questions that you want to ask. Who's signing the lease? Do you have any say? Are you going to be included in these decisions where you approve them? You know, I want my owners to approve. Hey, here's what I recommend. And then we have a discussion or they disagree or agree or whatever, and we go from there.
So it almost sounds like if you're deciding to go with a professional property manager because you want to be hands off, be careful what you ask for. You may go with a property manager because you want to be a little more hands off, but you still need to keep in mind that you are in a partnership with that property manager for the benefit of your investment. So
yeah, and if you want to have a whole lot of say on every little decision, self-management is probably the best route for you. And if you want to be totally hands off, that's perfectly fine too. But you need to pay attention. You need to know what's going on and be aware of what's going on. In other words, don't check out. Don't check out. You know, like check in. You know, you should also. The management company should be checking in with you regularly. If they should be going to the property on a regular basis, whether that's, some companies go quarterly, some companies go twice a year. What is their process of doing that? How do you know they've done it? What proof do they have? Did they record the proof? Did they take photos? Did they do a report and submit that to you? That should be done. Like what we do, we go to our properties every 6 months. We have an inspection app that we use. All the photos are date and time stamped. We take pictures of things that we think need attention, wear and tear items. We're checking the filters, to make sure the tenant's changing. We're looking under the sinks. We're looking for leaks. We're keeping eyeballs on the property, but we take pictures of it and we send that in an electronic report to our landlords. And we have that on a systematic rotation. And so that's how we show, hey, yes, we're going to the property. We're doing our due diligence. And not a lot of companies out there will have that in place.
Well, and I think that leads into our next 2 bullet points, actually. When you talk about some property managers say they offer a full service. And I think as a landlord or an owner, you really need to know, what is that full service? What does that include? Is that the advertising and the screening and the lease and the turnover, the inspections that you talked about? And then as well as the contract, are all of those, I guess, full service promises listed, explicitly? Like, are they in writing in that contract that you're signing? And what is the follow-up for those items? Like you mentioned inspections. Well, if a professional property manager says they're going to do inspections, how is that followed up? Like you said, you have an app that you send pictures and things like that. So I don't know, maybe we want to touch a little more on the full service and the contract portion of professional property management.
Yeah, I think you want to understand everything that they offer and the extent. I see some people and they, some comments that landlords make in some of these forums that we're in, and sometimes their expectations are not, they're asking too much. They're asking over and above. So you do want to fully understand what services are available, but probably the bigger thing that I see on a repeated basis is people don't know what's in their contract. It is so common for people, tenants, landlords, to not read leases and not read their property management contract. You need to really know that contract and understand what you're signing. I remember years ago when we were PCSing and, we rented out our house. And for those of you watching this who may not know what a PCS is, just in case you're not military, it's a permanent change of station. It's basically a military move. And I remember reading this contract and I was appalled. That's why we didn't go with property management for a number of years, because I was like, oh my gosh.
Not to jump in. When I started this, 2011, I was working as a property as an analyst at a firm that did management. And I remember being like, I'm so tired. I'm working 70 hours a week. I have no desire to ever be my own manager. I liked owning property from like watching my mom do it, but I used to get paid in crab soup for like painting and cleaning all day. And I always told my mom, never me, never me. I'm just hiring someone, right? I looked at their contract. I remember throwing it across my office and being like, this is Buntics. And I remember storming into my boss. It was like 6 o'clock at night. We both were like catching up on stuff. And I'm like, can you see this? Like we did property management, like we ran our own apartment complexes. So I was around it day in and day out. Like I knew what it was like. And I was like, have you read this? Like this is bull crippers. And that's what made me do it because I'm like, this is terrible. And over the years, I've learned that there's some amazingness and there's some bull crippers.
Well, it can be very expensive and you're signing over a lot financially. So that's why you really need to read the contract and see what the limitations of the management company actually are.
And what they offer. And like make sure that your expectations on what they offer is what they truly are offering.
Right, right. And then, of course, the terms, how long is this contract going to last? Does it renew automatically? Most importantly, how do you terminate the contract and what are the implications of terminating early? And I would even suggest that if you are going to go with a property management company in order to protect yourself, I would recommend doing a shorter term contract or, even advocating for no penalty after a certain number of months, because if they are not performing or they're negligent, and oftentimes what that is, how that manifests itself, and what you don't always know ahead of time is how responsive the company is. Over and over and over and over again, I hear, and I have people who come to me from other companies, they can't get in touch with the property manager. They call and call and call and call. Tenants are having to reach out privately, then find the landlord on Facebook to send them messages because the property management company is unresponsive on very important, big issues, and they can't get a response. That's just unacceptable. And so if they are if that's really what's happening and that becomes your experience right off the bat, you need to be able to get out of that contract. You don't need to be stuck in that for a year or 2 years or have to pay a huge penalty to cancel the contract. So that's a very important thing to be aware of.
I feel too that that's a great idea, or even asking about like a trial period. Because I think of it as if a professional property manager is going to do and hold up their end of the bargain, they would be willing to do that, I would think. Because
well, they need some accountability.
Yeah, they know they're going to do good.
Yeah, that's a way for you to build in that some sort of accountability for that property management company. And it's unfortunate that you have to do that, but as an industry, property management has a very low reputation because of some of these things, not going to properties, not holding a high standard, not being responsive, not following through, not taking care of things, putting just getting the property occupied so they can then draw the management fee month after month. But like you said, Elizabeth, if you get a great property management company, they're worth gold when they actually do what they're supposed to do. But unfortunately, as a standard, that's not usually what you get. So you have to be extra diligent if you're going to go into property management. And our last bullet point is the implications of that. The implication is, the financial implication of it costing you money, having to evict a tenant or property damage. And if you are shopping property management companies based on price, that's the wrong mindset, in my opinion. You want the right person, not the cheapest person, because the cheapest person, if they don't, or a more expensive person, but if you're just shopping price and they don't do a good job, it's going to cost you far, far more than paying someone who's a little bit more expensive. Say someone's going to charge you 7%, buys 10%. Well, if you have a great property manager at 10%, they're going to save you money in the long run. That 7% person might cost you tens of thousands of dollars because they don't do a good job.
Yeah, and I know we talked a little bit about, you know, either way you go, whether you go with property management or you self-manage, you're going to have to be hands-on. So let's talk a little bit about if you choose to self-manage, what are some of the considerations that you might have? I know we talked a little bit before this call about you could, if you're a self-manager, you may not have the professional knowledge that a property manager has, or you may be a new landlord and you're just getting your feet wet, and you know, you have your first rental house and you're really muddling your way through how to be a landlord. And unfortunately, that makes you kind of a risk to be targeted by what we would call professional renters, meaning
Yes.
renters who know how to work certain angles or systems, or, you know, I'm a little slow on rent. I had a bank error, I think is one that we talked about, or certain kinds of scams that maybe a professional property management company are very in tune with. Um, I think that
Yeah.
you open yourself up a little bit, and you don't want to learn from the school of hard knocks. Unfortunately, those
Well,
are the stories we hear about most of the time.
I think probably all three of us have learned from the school of hard knocks, but this is why we're doing this, so we can save other people,
Yep.
as much as we can. But yeah, you are a target if you're a brand new landlord, even if you're not a professional renter out there that's trying to scam people. Let's just say you're you've got a regular renter who comes along and they've just got a hardship story, and they have terrible credit, and they give you a letter. Literally, there's so many red flags that if you're not experienced, you don't know they're red flags. And what the biggest mistake that I see self-managing landlords make is that they make emotional decisions. It's not a business. Well, when you're renting your home out, it's a business now, and no one wants to be unkind to people who are having a true hardship. It's very sad. I always feel bad if I, come across these people, and I have hundreds of times, and I want to help them, but I'm not going to help them at my financial expense or my owners that I manage for. My job is to protect them financially. So, and that's the mindset you have to have, is that you, we all, I think most of us have bleeding hearts. And so someone comes along and they, maybe they've had a medical issue or whatever, and their credit is in the 500s and they have a lot of stuff in collections or whatever. They are not going to pay their rent. They're going to get into the property and they're going to continue to struggle. And then your family is impacted because now you're having to cover the mortgage. Instead of the rent covering the mortgage, you're going to have, and the likely story is that there was some irresponsibility. Maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. Most of the time, there's going to be irresponsibility there, and the credit is merely a picture of how responsible this person is, not just in how they pay their bills, but in how they take care of things. So just be aware when you feel that tug, oh, maybe I need to give them a chance. You have to resist that. You have to resist that. And you have to go, no, I have to protect my family first financially. I'm not running a charity. I'm running a business.
Well, and that's what I worked in banking and accounting for about 25 years now. And two things. One, I learned from a loan officer, I think she called it the 3 C's. When you're looking at a credit report or you're deciding if you're going to let someone lend money, or in this instance, borrow your house, you have their credit report reflects their character, their capacity to pay, and collateral, meaning, I guess if you're buying something. But I think that a credit report is an indication of someone's character when you're looking to do a financial relationship, which is to me what a landlord tenant relationship is. And then the bleeding hearts, I own a bookkeeping business, and one of my niches is doing the bookkeeping for property managers, and I'm talking multiplexes. And sometimes the owners, they have that bleeding heart and they want to, replace all of whatever, the food in the fridge because the fridge went out, or all the flooring because something happened. And just being knowledgeable, like, oh no, that is what renter's insurance will cover that. And oftentimes they say, oh, I didn't know that. And I'm like, if you want to pay for it because you just have the extra cash and you feel compelled to, that's one thing. But business decision wise, this is how it would normally work. And I think as a self-manager, you might not always be in tune with those things, whereas a property management company sees that stuff all the time.
Yep.
Right. And that comes, that goes to the next point about screening. When someone comes along, you want to screen them thoroughly. You want to get a full picture of this person. So that's their credit, criminal and eviction history, their proof of income, and their rental history. And I call those that's the three-legged stool. The number one piece of that, the first and most important leg of that is the tenant screening. And then because you're assessing how risky this person is going to be, like you said, capacity was one of the C's, and their capacity, their ability to pay. Even if they might make a decent income, but if they're highly leveraged with a lot of consumer debt, that's something that should give you pause. Even if they pay, but their credit might be a little bit on the lower side because of the amount of debt that they have. You just have to take all of that into consideration to get a full picture. And you don't want to compromise on that. You want to do the same screening every time with every single person. That'll keep you out of legal trouble as well. If somebody comes along and says, well, you didn't rent to me because I'm this ethnicity or whatever. And if you're actually looking at data and you have a standard metrics that you're screening for, then you have a system that you use. You can point to that and go, no, this is the same system that I use every single time. And you have it documented, and you can just duplicate that. But you don't want to shortcut that screening process. And if people come to you and they've got letters, personal letters, or they want to pay the rent up front, or they want to rush the process to get into the property quickly, or they don't want every single adult to be screened that's living in the house, even if they're not going to be financially responsible, you still need to screen every person, because there's a character and a behavior to every single person. And it's not just paying the bills, but it's how they're going to take care of the property. And I can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah. Elizabeth, did you have anything to add for screening?
No.
I'm going to do a personal plug because Angie, you might not plug yourself, but Rent Risk as a screening tool for self-managers, I have used Rent Risk personally for properties that I've rented out, and it is fantastic. It is very, very thorough. It provides a worksheet for decision-making for a landlord. And I know that it's backed by Experian, big credit report company. So I'm going to just do a plug because I know you won't, or maybe you would, but Rent Risk is great for this.
That's why we created Rent Risk, because everyone started coming to us at Command Properties to screen, like all my colleagues in real estate, and we couldn't scale it within, because we're so busy with our own clients. And so we wanted to be able to bring our level of tenant screening to the masses, really, and for people to be able to take care of themselves, because I'm really big on, hey, if, like we were saying earlier, if you can't find a good property management company, do it yourself. But we want you to be equipped if you're going to do it yourself. And so Rent Risk is really where that came from, and also our track record. So that leasing decision worksheet that's in there is to give you guidance and guidelines on how to look at the data and what questions to ask. And also, we have the highest tier of credit reporting data with Experian. I think we're about 1 to 2 weeks out from having Plaid fully integrated, which you'll be able to, when the tenant goes in to apply, and this isn't a tenant screening, discussion today per se, but we'll have Plaid integrated, and the tenant will be able to connect their bank account so that you can verify the income in their bank account. So there's a lot of fraud protection measures built into rent risk as well.
Well, I think that's to how we started this conversation is if you're going to go with a professional property manager, make sure it's a good one. If you're going to self-manage, make sure you do it right. So
yeah.
I think just like go back. I think that's what's so important. You know, when I've been doing this over the years, I get really tired of professionals telling me it's not possible. You know, I've done a really good job. I had my first eviction in literally 100 to 150. And you know what? I knew better, but we took a risk that I would never let anybody else do, and I still know better. So I go back with the thing is you can do it well. Sorry, my cat. But you have to be willing to do it well. And if you can't do it well, then you need to hire a professional, but don't hire a professional that also won't do it well because that's your problem. So like this is a
Yeah.
business and you have to do a good job. Can you do a good job or can you hire someone who's going to do a good job? But you have to do a good job and you're not going to be able to be hands off and you're not going to be able to be not involved because let's be honest, this is a business. And to be honest, you're not involved in anything else. You don't just drop your kid off at preschool or kindergarten and never talk to the person ever again. I mean, you're going to be involved. You're going to have to answer questions and you're going to have to be an active participant. Do you want to be in the passenger seat, a passenger seat princess, or do you want to be driving? That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. You just need to pay attention.
And a big part of that leads us to our next bullet, which is all about the lease. So like a lot of self-managers wonder, well, where will I find a lease? Well, how will I know if the lease is applicable to my state? We talk a lot about getting everything in writing, you know, nothing is a verbal agreement. Making sure that the lease pertains to your specific property because some properties have, you know, a well or a septic system or a wood burning fireplace or all of these different things. And that probably is a big difference between a professional property manager and a self-manager is the lease, I would think.
Yeah, and I would just say, don't print a stock lease off the internet. I would hire a real estate attorney to make sure you have an airtight lease. And if it's not in the lease, it doesn't exist. So it doesn't matter what you expected. It needs to be written in the lease. Either, you know, you can add an addendum, spell out different additional terms if there's certain things you want the tenant to be responsible for, but you need to have the information on there on like, what if you want to sell the property, you know, with the tenant in place, what's the time period before you can put it on the market? What if the tenant wants to break the lease? What are the lease break scenarios and implications? So all of that stuff needs to be in there. So it's worth paying for an attorney in your state to write the lease if you're doing it yourself.
And I do know Landlord Help Hub on our website, just to plug we do have a book, an ebook that walks you through considerations for things that you should think about putting in your lease. So whether that's meeting up with your attorney and going through these items that might pertain to your property or your lease or things you want to include, it at least is a launching point to help you get a really thorough lease. And we're not talking like a one-page lease. I mean, because your lease is going to be pretty long if you're including everything you need to include in it. Elizabeth, you're really well versed in leases.
And don't let anybody say that a long lease will scare around. Like, here's the thing. If you talk to someone who's owned their house for 40 years and has never be a tenant, that's not your peer. That's not who you talk to. It's not who you ask to. I can't tell you how many people looked at my 22-page lease and was like, oh my gosh, it's way too long. Nobody would ever touch that. Yes, they do. Yes, they do rent it. You need to like figure out that this is a business and talk to people who do this, not to people who've never ever owned a home, like rented out a house. It's very different as a rental than as a homeowner.
Yeah, and I feel like my lease is maybe a little on the more lengthy side, but I know Elizabeth, you and I have talked about this in the past. It's almost like just a turnover between me and the tenant where we go through it together and outline like everything, and it gives them a question to think things, or it gives them an opportunity to think things through. Ask me any questions about the property. If they ever have a question, you know, say it's been a year and they've been there, it gives us a guidebook to go back to and say, well,
Yeah.
what did we agree on? That's where we're going to go back to.
I'm
Yes.
sure everybody knows assumptions and what that like what that saying is. It makes an funness out of you and me, sub the word out. So for me, your lease is just a friendly reminder on what everybody knows, because you know what the reality is, maybe people don't know that a septic system can't have grease down it. Like my husband likes to say your garbage disposal is not a trash can, but maybe people don't realize that. So like I write everything down in my lease and we go over it, but that also provides a friendly reminder when I'm like, I swear that's what we said, but I don't have to say that. Like here's your signature on subsection 3, remember? So for me, it's not a scary document. It's a
Mhm.
path of like agreement on how to manage take care of a house.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
When
what
you
the
check
tenant's
into it,
responsive.
I'm
And
sorry,
what
go
the
ahead.
responsibility is, so that they don't suddenly think that you need mulch every single where that you've never had it because they've had it East Coast and it's not a West Coast thing, or vice versa. So it's just a friendly guidebook. I mean, think about your day job, as I like to say. You guys all have manuals and what's your expectations, and that's just helps keep everybody on the same page.
Yeah, it's like when you check into the Airbnb, there's usually a binder that's get acquainted with the property. To me, the lease is very similar in that regard, but a legal document of like, here's how this landlord-tenant relationship is going to work. Here's how you get acquainted with the things that are required for this property. And this is what we all agree to. And I think, Angie, you alluded already to one of these next topics, which is advertising and showing the house. So if you're a self-manager, so in the lease, you need to address a lot of things. And Angie, I think you already alluded to a little bit of this next bullet item is if you decide you want to sell your property, what does that look like? How much notice do you need to give and things like that? Or if you want to turn over your property and re-advertise it for a rental, how are you doing that? As a self-manager, like what are your avenues for actually advertising it and how are you going to do that? And then also, what if you're not an on-site? What if you live in a different state than your rental property? What is the plan and the agreement with the tenant for how you can show your house? So I know that if you have a local property manager, that looks one way. If you're a local self-manager, that looks one way. And then if you're a long distance landlord, that looks a completely different way. So what do you guys have to say for advertising and showing your property as a self-manager?
Well, I think the first two things you mentioned, property manager or local, if you're local and you're self-managing, that's a lot easier. If you're out of state, you have a couple of options. You can either, well, a few options. If you have a friend who can show the property, that's one thing. You may have to hire a realtor, somebody that you can partner with to actually open the door. Or if you have a great tenant who's super cooperative and the tenant is willing to do that, they could open the door. However, I would say just a caveat on that that's a little bit of a liability. If you put your property on Zillow, you have no idea who this person is that's coming into the home. So you're opening up a lot of risk for that tenant. And I would at least pre-screen people and ask for photo ID. So you know who's coming into the property, and that's just going to protect you from liability. It's going to protect the tenant. But you need to pre-qualify people to make sure that they are at least what they say that they are qualified with credit, income, good rental history, and all of that, just to cut down on unnecessary showings and minutia. But those are some ways that you can do it, if you're long distance.
And then as far as things to have in the lease with, talked a little bit about the advertising and showing, yeah, like not to waste time, thinking that someone's going to show up. I know in some markets, no shows are also a thing. So if you're asking your friend or you're paying an agent or you're asking the current tenant to show the property and you have no shows, that could also be a problem. And then the next thing I think when you're self-managing, you would need to really consider these repairs and maintenance and modifications to your home. I've had, and I think we've all maybe had, the tenants who move in and point out all the things that are, a ding on the wall, a nick in the baseboard. And at some point you're thinking, well, okay, those are just little things. But I know that the three of us has talked before that you never know what a tenant's past history is. So maybe they're expecting at turnover for a house to be in a certain condition and then maintained that way. Maybe they've been burned in the past as a tenant with a landlord coming back and saying, you caused that ding in the wall, you caused that nick in the baseboard, and they just don't want to be held accountable for it. So they're pointing it out. So I think also as a self-managing landlord, you have to be really cognizant of what is considered like maintenance, what is considered repair, and just general upkeep. Because we also talked about standards on the property manager side. You want to keep your house to a certain standard, not only the certain standard that you rented it out for initially, but so that it has longevity as a good investment down the road.
Yeah, and I think too, with everything you just said, I completely agree with it. There's some people management skills involved in this. When the tenant comes to you, I think you so rightly pointed out they could be coming from a bad situation. So I always ask people, are you just telling me this because you want it documented? Or are you asking for this to be fixed? And if it's not, and there's some subjectivity to that. Is this a legitimate thing, or is this being very nitpicky? If your property's in overall great shape, we'll have a lot of very, very nitpicky people. And my standards are pretty high. So if I go to a property, I'm like, oh my gosh, this property is like great, and they're just being super nitpicky, then I just tell them, you know what, I appreciate you pointing that out. We'll put it in the record for your property, that your notes, but the landlord's not going to do anything about this particular thing at this time. If something's really broken, of course it's functional and it's important that we fix it, we'll do that. But so there's some expectation management with that. And then, but ask questions, ask what they want. What would you like me to do here?
Yeah.
It's okay to ask that question. It's very helpful because it lets you know what they're thinking and what they're, and so you're not, again, like Elizabeth said, not making assumptions.
Yeah. And I think too, you need to really, if you're self-managing, you need to have a good handyman, a good plumber, a good electrician, like on dial, because you want to cover routine maintenance. If there is a slow drain, well, why is it a slow drain? Maybe the tenant is telling you that, and it's meant to clue you in on something.
Well, it's also important to really look at the situation. And I have a great experience today or this week of why it's so important to understand, have either boots on the ground or have if you're going to self-manage, you need a really involved tenant. We had a fence go down at one of our houses because of a windstorm. And we figured it out, I don't know, 3 days after, because it's a short-term rental. And I tried to get a hold, I've sent my people next door, and so it's two tenant situations next, we're a tenant situation, they're a tenant situation. And they went over and they're like, I don't know. So I got my people, we got a quote, we got ready to do it. And then finally the owner got a hold of me, self-manager, and she's like, it's gonna cost $2,100 to fix this. And I'm like, my people will fix it for $300 to $400. I don't understand, right? And she's like, oh, we have to redo all of it and cement it. And I'm like, the whole fence is fine. It was like a toothpick. It fell over. We're gonna fix two sides of the boards and do it in. She's like, oh, I'm overwhelmed. I just can't. And I'm like, I respect that. That's fine. And so that's where I go back to you have to be all in or you're going to throw money at it. By her not hiring a property manager, in my mind, she overspent by almost $1,600. How much would she have spent in having property management? Now, when I got started, we were on one income. I couldn't work. I had a master's degree, but couldn't work. This became my side job. This became my way of taking care of my family. It still is to today. I am all in. I am beyond all in. So that's why I've loved self-managing, but I also have flown out and looked at stuff. I've also done stuff. I mean, we had a ceiling issue and people were like, oh my gosh, this is thousands of dollars. And we got our handyman because we do this all the time to look at it. And they're like, dude, it's a couple $100 in drywall and add some paint on it. Oh, by the way, do you still have that paint I used last year? So I go back to like you are paying for what you get. Either you're paying in time and education expense because we've all had that, or you're paying in someone's education that they're bringing in. So you need to understand like what your options are and like what you're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to self-manage, are you, willing and capable of small repairs or managing these small repairs, or do you want to be a little bit more hands-off, because a professional property management already has those vendors and those staff. And then that brings us to our last bullet point in the self-management, which is care. So will a property manager care about your property more or less than you? Maybe that's something you want to consider. It's your investment. So, and I think we've already hashed this up a few times, is that either way you go, you're going to be, as an owner, the person who cares the most about your property. So whether it's hiring a top-notch property manager or taking the time, energy, and efforts to self-manage is a decision that really only you can make.
And I'd like to jump
Exactly.
in one more time. I love self-management. I am the first to advocate for it and the first to say it's amazing. But let me tell you, it sometimes is too much caring. So you also have to be able to step back. And I think the biggest thing that I would like to reiterate from someone, like I have hired a self-manager or a manager before. I found someone to my standards and my ability who actually did a better job than me. And if you know me, you'll know that's very tough. But like she had the people on the ground. And the reality is, if you manage 200 properties like Angie does, right? Someone is going to answer her phone call a lot quicker than they're going to answer your phone call when you've never used that area and you've never done it before. From someone who's building her contacts in a brand new area and who's having to go through and been like, that's not market rent for or market rate for what I'm doing. Angie beats it. Like she's gonna beat it out. But you have to find someone that has her standards. And so the thing that you need to look at, it's not just the care. Like it's not that she calls you back in 10 seconds, because honestly, sometimes those aren't the people we want. There's a reason they can call you back in 10 seconds. Just saying. You want someone that has the standards that you're looking for. So sit down on the paper, write down what you want, and then be realistic in your expectations. But remember, at the end of the day, you can't take care too much. Like helping a friend and like we're having a conversation and I've had to ask her some questions. And I'm like, but do you care? She's like, but I do because this is my da 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 da. My kids brought home. They did their first step. And I'm like, dude, not the right kind of caring. Like, are they taking good condition and taking good care of it? Sorry, I'll let you jump in, Angie.
No, I mean, I think those are all great points. I mean, kind of circling back to where we started, what we said at the beginning, you really need to know yourself. And some of it's going to be experimentation. So you've got to be willing to like fail forward. But at the end of the day, you need to have a little bit of grit to be a landlord and well, maybe a lot of grit. And, you just got to be a little bit tough. You can be kind and be firm at the same time, with people. And with your property, you can be professional, but again, you're going to have to take off your personal hat, your emotional hat, and put on your business hat, because now you're managing an asset, you're running a business, and so you have to do that from a different mindset.
Well, I do appreciate you guys, having this table talk and getting together and talking about this actually pretty hot topic. I mean, this comes up a lot. Whether we see landlords who have been landlords of multiple properties for multiple years, just trying to make a decision, or whether it's a brand new landlord renting out their first place, this question comes up a lot. So hopefully this is a valuable resource to those out there watching. You can go to the landlordhelphub.com website. We have rent risk, which we talked a little bit about in this video as a tenant screening tool. Super easy to do. And I will put some links below, and feel free to reach out to Angie or Elizabeth or me with any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.